Genshin's new endgame mode, the Imaginarium Theater, has arrived and you can get tons of free Primogems out of it, as well as valuable character and artifact materials. So, in today's guide, I'm gonna tell you everything you need to know about the Imaginarium Theater, how to get the shiny rewards, and of course, I also have some valuable tips for you to make the whole procedure much easier. So, without further ado, let's jump right into it. So, first things first, how do you even unlock the Imaginarium Theater? And luckily, this is pretty simple. Once you've reached Adventure Rank 35, you have access to that specific Imaginarium Theater quest that will pop up in your journal, and what it boils down to is that quest simply only points you towards the Knight of Favonia's headquarters into the library. There you have access to the new Imaginarium Theater room, and then you can pretty much start already. That's all. But now that you've unlocked it, let's take a closer look at what the Imaginarium Theater even is in detail. See, the Imaginarium Theater, or IT to be short, is a new and permanent endgame combat game mode. So even in the far future, this will still be there, and it is not just a seasonal thing. Each season of the Imaginarium Theater lasts for 1 month, and it revolves around 3 specific elements. For example, in the first season, the 3 elements that it revolves around are Pyro, Electro, and Anemo. As for what it is like to play this, it's actually pretty straightforward. In the Imaginarium Theater, you will go through a set number of combat challenges involving the characters of those 3 elements that the season revolves around. In contrast to the Spiral Abyss though, each combat encounter here is completely isolated. However, you're not so free to put your teams together because you're limited to a set pool of characters that you can choose at the beginning of your run, and those characters can also only be used for 2 runs until you have to choose someone else. Don't worry if it sounds a bit complicated, we will get to that right now. Alright, so what's so special about the whole character thing here? See, the main challenge in the Imaginarium Theater does not really come from the combat itself. The enemies here are significantly easier than in the later Spiral Abyss floors. The main challenge here is to wisely manage your characters so that you always have the right ones for the right combat encounters. Each and every season has one main cast of characters. These are pre-selected by the game, and they are of the elements that the season revolves around. So for example, in this first season, we have Pyro, Electro, and Anemo characters in the main cast. In case you don't have these characters on your personal account, that's not so much of a problem because the game will provide you with trial versions of those characters who are at least decently equipped. You can take a look at their weapons and their artifacts. It's definitely not as powerful as a highly invested character that you yourself would have, but it is good enough for this game mode. By the way, in case you do have a copy of that character on your own account, you can either choose to go with the trial character anyway, if that's better, or if not, then you can pick your own version of them. Also very important, one thing to note here is that these main cast characters in every season get a so-called fantastical blessing. What that means is they get a specific buff, making them much stronger, not only in the Imaginarium Theater, but also in the overworld and in the Spiral Abyss. As long as the season with them is going on, these characters throughout the entire game will be much stronger. You can also see it by this little icon in your own character selection screen. And just by the way, if you could drop a short like, that would be super helpful for the video because the YouTube algorithm loves this, so cheers so much for your support. But yeah, so much for the main cast. These are the characters that you will start the first round of the Imaginarium Theater with. However, you do have the option to expand your character pool beyond just that. See, depending on which difficulty you choose, you can pick characters from your own account that match this season's elements and add them into the character pool alongside the main cast. But wait, that's not all yet. There's also a specific amount of characters called special guests that do not match the elemental requirements of this season, but you can add them regardlessly if you have them on your own account. For example, in this season, Alhaitham is one of the available special guests, and I happen to have a pretty good one, so I chose to also add Alhaitham to my main pool of characters. And finally, there is one last way of adding characters, and that is the so-called support characters, where every player can select a few of their characters from their accounts and make them available for their friends, and then their friends can go and pick up to one of those characters to also add to their pool to help out. For example, in my case, I chose my C2 Raiden with her signature weapon and a pretty strong artifact set to be available for my friends because I'm sure they can make good use of her. However, even if you make characters playable for your friends, you yourself will also still be able to play those characters in your Imaginarium Theater, so it's a win-win situation for everybody. But alright, I know that was quite a lot, so let's go through a quick summary of which characters you can choose. First of all, the main cast will be available for every player out there, no matter if they have the characters on their account or not. These will be the first characters that you start the challenge with. In addition to that, you can pick multiple of your characters that you have on your own account if they have the right element, plus up to 4 special guests that have other elements if you have them on your account, and up to one of the characters that your friends provide as a support character. Once you've built your entire pool of characters out of those sources, you can start the challenge. And speaking of starting the challenge, how about we take a look at an entire run, start to finish, so I can explain to you step by step what happens when, and after that I'm also going to give you some valuable tips that make those runs incredibly easy for most accounts out there. Let's get right to it. As I just said, before starting into the challenge, you build your main pool of characters out of all these sources. The first thing you see after starting the run is this screen where you have the option to pick out of different events that will happen next. Let's go over the different event types step by step, starting out with the combat event. See, for every round of the theater, you need to finish one combat event to be able to start the next round. Sometimes there's only one combat event to choose, but sometimes there are multiple, so you can always see which enemies you're more comfortable with and which you would rather not fight. When you choose a combat event, you will get into the arena, fight the enemies, and after you successfully complete it, you will go back to the main hall of the theater. From there, you can go back to the book and start the next stage. Every combat event not only has the main goal of finishing it within the time limit, but also additional goals like, for example, killing at least one enemy with a heavy attack or triggering a certain amount of elemental reactions. Finishing a combat encounter will give you multiple rewards. First of all, it will draw one random character from your entire big pool of characters and add it to the amount of playable selectable characters for the next event. And also, if you manage to do those side objectives, you will get a certain amount of a resource called Fantasia Flowers, which is used to get buffs for the next round of the Imaginarium Theater. Also, and this is very important to note, is every character can only be used twice in the entire run. So as you progress from stage to stage, you need to make sure to add more and more characters from your main character pool into your character select pool so you don't run out. When we go back to the event selection screen, then we will see though that there are not just combat events, but also character events, Wanderer's Boons, and mystery caches. So what about that? First of all, character events are pretty nice. Here, you pay a certain amount of those Fantasia Flowers, and then you can select one more character from your main pool to be inserted into your amount of playable characters. This is very nice to stock up on more characters to choose from, to have a better selection and make it easier to finish the next stage. When you go for Wanderer's Boons, the game will present you with 3 random buffs, out of which you can select one, and that will then last for the entire run, similar to what you would do in the Spiral Abyss. As for the mystery caches, these are pretty interesting. They also provide you with effects similar to the Wanderer's Boons, but those effects could be positive but also negative. In case the event selection is not to your liking, you can also reroll and the game will give you new events that are hopefully better. You can do that up to 2 times if I'm correct per run, and then you rinse and repeat that for every stage until you reach the end. But alright. I get that this is a lot and it might be complicated to understand and you might have a lot of question marks over your head right now, but don't worry, you will get into it pretty quickly. And also now I want to give you some very important tips that if you follow them closely, the entire challenge is going to be much easier. So let's get into it. And one big mistake that I think many players make is that when they put together their character pool in the beginning, they choose too many main on-field DPS characters to put it in there. See, with 8 combat challenges to play through, and every character being able to go through 2, that means in the ideal case, you only need 4 main DPS characters, and that will be enough. So when you put together your pool of playable characters, make sure to not take significantly more than 4 main DPS characters, because if you have too many on-fielders, it's not gonna help and you will end up in a situation where there are 3 on-field characters selectable for the next run just sitting idly off screen doing nothing. Rather, and that will be tip 2, focus on sub-DPS characters and buffers. The reason why you want to go for mostly offensive characters is because of the fact that every combat encounter is isolated from one another. Whenever you start a new encounter, the energy, HP, bursts, everything of all the characters will be full, so it will be a fresh start every time. And since those combat encounters don't last for that long, in many situations you won't even need a shielder, you won't even need a healer, because it will be over that fast. So when selecting your characters, make sure you have a lot of off-field DPS characters and buffers, because those fit in every team and they will always be a great help. Then another important tip is that one well-invested damage-dealing character, either on or off-field, should usually be enough to carry the entire team. In the Imaginarium Theater, enemies are significantly less tanky and strong, so you don't need a hyper-invested team with 4 great min-maxed characters. 1 well-invested character, with the other 3 being kind of decent at least, should be more than enough to be able to clear through even the hard mode. Then, one thing you never ever should do is focus too much on the additional golds for each combat encounter, because while they might give you those flowers to get more buffs for the next round, even if you don't get any of those additional golds done throughout the entire run, this has no negative influence on your rewards. In order to get all the Primogems and all the shinies, all you have to do is finish every stage. How well you do that doesn't really matter, and if I'm being honest, the time limit for finishing the combat encounter in the first place is pretty generous, so you shouldn't have that much of a problem. And in order to be able to beat the higher level bosses in the later stages, you can make use of the following tip, and that is, when there are characters in your main pool that are not really well invested and that you know suck really bad on your account, then try your best to burn through the energy of those characters in the earlier stages where the enemies are still very weak and manageable, so that when you get more playable characters later on, you conserve your stronger DPS characters for the later boss stages. And as you also see in the background right here, my highly invested Yoimiya is absolutely annihilating the final boss here. So yeah, if you choose your initial characters wisely and follow my tips, then I think most accounts out there shouldn't have that much of a problem even finishing the hardest mode, which I think is a good thing. But now, how about we take a look at which rewards will be at the end of the tunnel after you've finished all those combat encounters. First off, there are of course seasonal rewards. Those are called performance tour rewards. These refresh every season, so every month, and as you also see on screen here, you get Primogems and other upgrade materials as well as Mora for every combat encounter that you've finished. Then there's also another set of rewards. Those are called debut performance rewards, which you will get only one time for finishing each and every one of those 8 stages for the first time. However, once you've gotten them, they will never refresh. It's kind of like floor 1 to 8 from the Spiral Abyss. As you play through the different stages, you will get a resource called Toy Medals, with which you can go to Wolfie here and exchange them for so-called thespian tricks, which are basically poses for specific characters in your photo mode. Just by the way, the Xiangling on the thumbnail of this video was one of them. And finally, but I think this is pretty unimportant for most players out there, if you do exceptionally well in your combat encounters and you nail most of those additional bonus objectives, then the game will give you certain performance medals for those stages, which you can show to your friends in your profile. But for me personally, I don't really care as long as I get the Primogems. But what about you? Have you already tried the Imaginarium Theater? What are your opinions, and have you already finished all the stages? Let me know in the comments down below. And if you now want to know which characters are the most valuable ones for your personal account, then don't miss this guide right here. We see each other, hopefully in the next one, and until then, as always, travel smart.